This podcast is brought to you by Spirits and Distilling for those who make and drink great spirits. Join our free email newsletter for technical and creative distilling stories in your inbox every week. Learn more at spiritsanddistilling.com.
Hey guys, welcome back to the Craft Spirits and Distilling podcast. My name is Sydney Jones. This is episode number 32, number 10 of this season, and we are talking to some good friends of mine from my home state of Florida, who I knew and got to know when I was living down there in Jacksonville, Florida. We are talking to Rick and Zach from St. Augustine Distillery and Citygate Spirits. We're going to talk about how these two companies are interconnected, their respective portfolios, the role that tourism plays within these two businesses, flavored spirits and how those are a really important part of craft distilling, and also how do you get started as a distiller? How do you get into this industry? How do you rise? And where do you find really good mentorship? All of that is going to be covered today in the podcast. I'm really excited, especially because the Florida girl gets to talk to Florida boys. So always a really good time. But before we get into all of that, a quick reminder that G&D Chillers understands that each distillery's chilling requirements are unique. On every distillery project, G&D offers the front-end design and engineering your team needs at no cost to you. Hank Presley, head distiller at Moondrop Distillery, says, early on, we made a decision to partner with quality American-made companies. One of those companies was G&D Chillers, and we are proud of that choice. Our equipment from them has run long and strong. We put our first barrel in our rickhouse in September 2021, and in the next 3 years, we have put back more than 540 barrels. What a great decision to team up with a company like G&D Chillers. Reach out for a quote today at gdchillers.com. Zach and Rick, super excited to have you guys on. I've known Zach and Rick for like a very hot minute, and it's really cool to see how their careers have progressed, especially along my career. Rick, he and I went to Portland together. We went to the American Distilling Institute conference together. God, what was that? 2018, 2019?
It had to be around there, yeah.
Billion years ago? Yeah. Whole nother life.
It feels like it, yeah.
It was a great time. God, that was the first distilling conference I ever went to. And it kind of like lit a fire under my ass. And I got really excited about my future and learned way more than I had the brain space for at the time.
I think we all went to Multnomah Whiskey House together, right? And we were like blown away at how many whiskeys they had there.
You might have gotten into Multnomah. I did not. I acutely remember really wanting to go there, but that was when I think you might still need to like know someone on the inside. And I was such a baby. I didn't know anybody at Multnomah. I remember having amazing food. I remember eating like the eyeball out of a salmon head when we were in Portland. And that was awesome. Great food, great time. It was the first really big trip that I had, and like Rick was a very central part of it. So that was super cool.
I think that was back in the days of just pretending like you know people, right? It's like, yeah, I'm supposed to be here, right?
Fun fact, at that conference at ADI Portland that year, that is the first time that I heard a lady named Molly Troop speak on Rotovap Distilling, and Molly is the other host of this podcast. And I always tell Molly that was the moment that I fell in love with her, is when I listened to her present on rotary evaporator technology and how it could be applied to gin distilling. So fun times.
It's funny. I remember exactly that same thing. And my partner, Dana, who you know, like Molly's her hero. And we still talk about Rotovap all the time. Like, we never got one, you know, but we really want to try it out. We really want to see what that's all about.
Molly is always the queen of Rotovap. She will always be the queen in my mind. And then Zach, who is our other guest on this podcast, I met Zach at Total Wine back in 2020, which is a year that I will not acknowledge outside of this podcast because it was a trash year for so many reasons. I was working at a distillery in Jacksonville, Florida at the time, who cut my hours because we were only making hand sanitizer. And to supplement my income at the time, because I was being paid hourly, I didn't have health insurance, I didn't make a whole lot of money as a distiller, I bartended at night. I worked at a craft bar in downtown Jacksonville, Florida, and the pandemic shut that down. So I had to find other routes of income. And Total Wine hired me as a seasonal associate. And I got to meet Zach at Total Wine. And we had such a great time because, God, what a clusterfuck the pandemic was for Total Wine.
I actually just got a memory on my phone the other day. It was a photo of you, me, Nancy, and a couple of other employees. And I remember buying us all face masks that had unique faces on them, and we were posing with them.
It wasn't even just unique faces. They were mustaches.
Yes,
Zach.
That's true.
They
and
were
now I have a real one.
Yeah, you have a real one now. We all had mustaches because we all had to wear face masks. And I think I still have that face mask in my car. I could never give it up. Yeah. And it was great.
I think we might even go slightly back before then, because my very first ever roommate I met through Total Wine, and I want to say I remember you giving us a whole private tour over at Manifest.
Probably. Man, time is a fickle thing. Those
True.
years blend together for me, but I do remember Total Wine because that was when the world felt like it was ending. And I will always be really thankful for my experience at Total Wine because it taught me how sales work and how a big box retailer works and how they sell product and how they market product and how you as a distiller need to keep that in mind when making spirit. And was really crucial. And you and I talked back then about how you really wanted to get into distilling, and now you are head distiller for Citygate Spirits, correct? That was a new development. Yeah.
And just over a month now. I'm very blessed, very fortunate to be both head distiller and spirits educator over at Citygate Spirits. And then I'm still retaining some responsibilities over at St. Augustine Distillery as well, doing a little bit of distilling and spirit educating. And it's been truly a blessing. And to look back from, those conversations like you and I were talking about back then to now, it's amazing.
It's all real. It's
real.
It's real. So let's rewind a little bit. And Rick, I know you've had a very long history and connection with St. Augustine. Can you tell me a little bit about some of the history of St. Augustine and how Citygate was born? For those who might not be familiar, I remember visiting St. Augustine shortly after it opened and buying like one of the first batches of vodka and thinking it was so cool. And this was way before I had any aspirations of entering into distilled spirits. So like I was a child. So tell me a little bit about the history of this organization and how you found your way to it.
Yeah, absolutely. So St. Augustine Distillery, as far as I can tell, was an idea from around 2008, 2009. So we kind of get called second wave a lot, which I think is accurate. But, Phil McDaniel, Mike Diaz, both had the idea. They both kind of had like the traditional St. Augustine story, right? Like they came down and went on vacation and they really fell in love with the area and they wanted to do something cool. So they found this kind of old derelict building that was from, over 100 years ago that was kind of in a blighted area of town, Lincolnville. And they saw an opportunity to bring it back to manufacturing. It used to be an ice plant facility. So they got a hold of that, really started working on the idea in around, I think it was 2011 was really when it started to pick up steam. Built it out, put out the first products in 2014 and started welcoming people in the door. And the rest is kind of history. Had Florida's first bourbon at that time, which was really cool. The first one that we came out with was only about a year and a half old. So, we learned a lot from that in the meantime, but did quite a few things in between here and there. But how it kind of evolved into Citygate was that, they saw an opportunity. As you mentioned kind of earlier, tourism is a huge thing for us here at St. Augustine. And it was very apparent from day one that you really have to lean into that to have a business in this area. I mean, you've been to St. Augustine a lot. You know that there is not a lot of real estate here. So trying to make a huge manufacturing distillery was kind of off the table from day one. So the way that they looked at it was got to welcome people in the door, got to keep your lights on that way. And that idea evolved over time. It was kind of known at that time that maybe the people who supported St. Augustine Distillery would not support having a second brand in the same house that was branded St. Augustine Distillery. It really didn't make sense to try to do a flavored spirits thing, but we knew we weren't capturing 100% of the people that came through the door. You get a lot of people that come in and they say, I'm just not a vodka drinker, not a gin drinker, I'm not a rum drinker. How do you make those people happy? So after some research and, seeing what they were doing up in Gatlinburg, it made a lot of sense to get into flavored spirits and kind of do our craft twist on that and open up a second brand. So I should be clear, they are two totally separate businesses that do share some management, and they were founded by the same two people, but they operate totally separately. And that was 2019. We first started working on Citygate Spirits, and we've been here ever since.
So St. Augustine was one of the kind of the big first wave craft distillers that I knew of being in Florida. And to my knowledge, there weren't a lot of craft distilleries in Florida at the time. There are quite a few now. You have a whole craft distillery trail in Florida. So what would you say is kind of the legacy there in terms of St. Augustine inspiring other craft distilleries in the state? Because when you think of the state of Florida, you don't necessarily think craft distilling, but you guys were kind of the leaders in that.
Yeah, I think one of the really important genius moments, if you want to call it that, of Phil and Mike was that they understood that you're not getting away from Florida. If you set up here, it has to be a central part of your identity. So, as challenging as it is to be, amongst the first people to try to figure out, particularly how to age spirits in the state of Florida and all the wild environment we have here, you also kind of have to pay homage to what was here before. So as far as we know, it was really just Palm Ridge, I think, that was here before us. And of course, Florida Caribbean has been here for quite a while too. But
and Palm Ridge is great. They're so small.
Yeah.
And they do some, correct me if I'm wrong, they don't really control their fermentations in terms of heat. They do things very natural. They let kind of things take their course. They don't cool their fermentations. They let them run a little hot. They distill extraordinarily small batches from my memory, and this could have changed. But back in the day when I was still living in Florida, that was how I got to know Palm Ridge, is that they were this tiny distillery in the middle of nowhere in South Central Florida that were doing these really, really cool, very, very small batch things that definitely have this kind of hot Florida terroir to it.
Exactly. And my favorite story that I ever heard about Palm Ridge, and unfortunately they are no longer in business, which is very sad.
I didn't know that. Oh, man.
Yeah,
ow.
But
barb to my heart.
My favorite story I heard about those guys was Phil went down there to talk to him, and he noticed that they were aging everything in 5-gallon barrels. And he asked one of the guys, so you figured this out, right? Like 5 gallons, the right size to be aging in the state of Florida? And he said, no, that's the only size I can pick up. So, it's like a really great example of, when you're early on in craft, you figure it out.
Mm-hmm. And you guys were kind of some of the people that first collected solid data, in my mind, on whiskey aging in the state of Florida. And I know it's something that we considered quite a bit when I was distilling in Florida, how to properly age whiskey in this environment, because whiskey ages very different than rum, and you will get mixed results sometimes. So can you tell me about that learning curve? Because I remember that you guys did a double cask finish on your first batch to kind of help try to slow that maturation roll.
Exactly. And that was some advice that we got, Dave Pickerel, rest in peace. He kind of gave us the kind of standard playbook that said, you can get more flavor faster if you start off with a smaller barrel. But I think nobody considered at that time that we could easily over extract, which is exactly what happened. So, about 1.5 years into that process, you figure out, kind of got an oak bomb here. You got to put them in, another barrel that's a much larger format and try to slow that extraction down. And that's what turned into double cask, and learn from that right away. Everything we do now is either 53 or 60. We do have a couple of finishes that we've done in some 350 liter and bigger. But yeah, it's been a challenge. I mean, I think each year, Zach can back me up on this, but we learn, I'm not going to say as we go, but we learn something every single year, and we try to improve every single year if we can.
Yeah, it's something you can't really learn without data to back it up, especially when there is no historical data. You just have to learn by doing. And I love that you guys are using 60-gallon casks, because I know Iron Root out in Texas, they are doing something similar with larger barrels to try to slow this really, really insane extraction that they get. To you guys who are listening, in Florida, if you are not aware, it's very hot. It does not get cold. And you start seeing maturation effects starting at about 45 degrees Fahrenheit and up, and a barrel of whiskey. And Florida pretty much stays there year round. And it gets very volatile, very hot. And when it does dip below 45, it does not stay there for long. It will come back up very, very quickly. So you see wild swings in temperature, wild swings in pressure, and that can lead to some really, really insane extraction in your casks. So making whiskey in Florida is kind of a very tricky undertaking, especially with the humidity. Have you guys seen any complications from the humidity as well, with your proof doing weird, awkward things?
Tons. I mean, and we get questions about that all the time when we age things on site at the facility. Here on Riberia Street, we almost always have our proof go up. Now at our aging warehouses, we see them go both directions, and we get asked every single day, like, which way does it go for you guys? And they say, well, both. You know, it depends on how much airflow you got going over it. It depends on where you put it in the rick house. There's a bunch of factors, but we see both. But you mentioned the 45 degree thing. I've been doing some internal barrel temperature monitoring, and I've never seen any of our barrels go below 78.
Ew.
Yeah.
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 That's a lot. And oh my God, what is your evaporative loss from that? I mean, when I was working down there, it was about 10 to 20% a year.
Yep.
Yeah.
These days
Similar.
we're averaging, I think it's 24 to 26. And that's after 3 years. So we never pull before 3 years. And as of this year, actually, it's never before 4 years. So we're waiting to find out the results on that. But that's been a big part of my job here, actually, is try to slow down that loss as much as I possibly can. And I got a few tricks up my sleeve, but, the results are still out because it takes several years to find out what actually happened.
Have you guys thought about doing anything with, there's some conjecture with carbon capture technology, CO2 capture, that could potentially be used to capture ethanol as well and introduce that back into your product stream. Now, the quality of that ethanol is still very much up to debate, but is that something that you guys have considered as well? Because that's a lot of money that you lose in Florida just through evaporative loss. Yeah,
I mean, we've, I think when we go to, ACSA, ADI, we get hit with kind of the same, this is the new technology, this is the crazy thing. And we've kind of seen it all. I mean, one of the ones that really intrigued me was there was a rubber barrel cap that went over the head of the barrel. And when you're storing upright, it stops the evaporative loss from the top of the head, and it captures it and it pools it on top of the barrel. And I thought it was an interesting idea, but just like you mentioned, my first question was, what does this taste like? Is it going to be
exactly
good?
Yeah.
So I think we've
you want evaporative loss. It's not it's actually a very good thing. It's just, you lose money that way, but you also gain flavor.
Well, we kind of have this saying around here, and I don't know if you have the same in Kentucky, but, the uglier a barrel is, the better it's going to taste. And, that directly correlates to that, because if it's got a leak in it, it's oxidizing more. We're probably going to be happier with the results.
Yeah. It's usually the barrels that look like shit. I'm like, you have good stuff. I want you.
I mean,
it's not the pretty barrels.
I don't know if it's the same for you, but that's one of my single barrel tricks. Like when I got to go look for single barrels, I'm like, where are the ugly ones? That's the first thing I'm doing.
My trick is whenever I would see a barrel that had some really distinctive, kind of like waves from pressure differentials, like you would see like a bowed, like stave or barrel head or something like that. Like it's just completely warped. That was always the thing that would tell me you probably have some really cool stuff in you. And it never served me wrong.
I think Zach's writing that down right now. No, I'm kidding. I'm joking.
Yeah, if you go into your rick house and you see a barrel that the head is just completely, it looks like a wave or whatever else, try that you might see some cool stuff in there.
That's a good pointer. I've never thought about that, actually.
Yeah, it's probably gone through the most pressure changes. It's been subjected to the most barometric pressure changes. And that's just, I've always had that luck. There is no wrong or right way to search for good single barrels in a distillery. I just like the ones that looked really malformed. Like the Frankenstein monster of barrels were the ones that I always gravitated towards.
And I think that's one of those things too, where like, people would be like, well, where are your honey spots? Right. And I'm like, I can't really tell you. I just kind of know, it's like when you put them in there yourself and you've been kind of watching these barrels and you've been cracking the bungs a little bit over the years, you know that you're kind of like gravitating towards a specific spot. But when you rotate those barrels out and you eventually pull those barrels, the ones that go back to replace it might not be your favorites anymore. It's year to year. It's very rope-a-dope, if you will.
Yeah, for sure. Well, so my next question for you is, as it goes into barrel maturation, I know when I was working down there, I had to make really lean cuts off of my hybrid pot to get a product that would age well. These fatty esters that come with your tail cuts, they just take longer to break down and cask, and time is not a luxury that you have in Florida. And I know you guys are working with 2 Vendome pots, correct?
Correct.
For your stripping run and your finishing run. Are you seeing something similar where you have to be very mindful of your heads, hearts, and tails, or can you afford to be a little fattier as you go into larger casks?
We cannot afford anything. So, we have improved quite a bit over the past couple of years on our yields out of every spirit run. But, I have to do the math on this stuff all the time. We're still averaging around 68% of available alcohols on the final spirit. So, our cuts are very lean.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. It's an interesting perspective, distilling down in Florida versus distilling. Like when I was at View, I knew that I had a short window when it was going to be really, really hot, but I would have 6 months where it would be below freezing for such a long time, and my barrels had a resting period. And I knew if I missed a tail cut on a run, if it went a little fattier than I wanted it to, it would all even out because these barrels could afford to sit for a very long time, and you don't have that luxury down in Florida. You have to be a very, very precise distiller.
I'd be really curious about the effects on the actual still itself too, like in that cold of an environment. I've never had the pleasure of running a still where it's, freezing inside the building. I'd love to see how that works.
I can tell you just from experience, it's not comfortable. It's cold. I would find myself hugging the still at certain parts throughout the day. But it made it a much more stable system overall. I never had to worry about it overheating in the winter, which was a really nice thing. I know overheating, depending on how your coolant lines are plumbed to your condenser, might not be a thing for other distilleries. A lot of it depends on your civil engineering. But it made for a very, very docile run. Summer was much more volatile. It was a lot harder to control, and I think anyone can say that. I'm sure it's a bitch for you guys running your stills in the dead of summer in a ice house that is designed to hold temperatures.
Yeah, we've got 1 boiler, 1 chiller, and it's running 2 giant pot stills, 1 small gin still, and a mash tank. And we've got all that on the line, so it's kind of a little bit of a exercise in patience. Everybody kind of has to walk around for a few minutes, and they're like, "Can I start heating my water yet?" And we're like, "No, wait just a few minutes. We'll get there."
So switching gears a little bit, you guys are making a ton of whiskey now, but you guys started with clear spirits, rum, vodka, gin. Have you seen an evolution of those spirits in terms of your company's history? Because you guys have been around for so long now. Have you seen any tweaks to it? Has it evolved? Has your production processes changed? What would you tell me as someone who had it at the very beginning, who hasn't had it in a few years now, just because I've lived up north for so long? Is it an old friend that I'm going to remember, or are there noticeable differences?
So the gin, I'm proud to say, is the one spirit inside the building that has never changed from day one. It's as a creator, you always want to tinker with things, you always want to change it, but there was a resounding do not touch that gin. It was just, I'm not going to say it was perfect the way it was, but we've been very happy with it as of this point. So the gin has never changed. The vodka has never changed as of this point. The rum and the bourbon have changed a lot. And we're very excited about the changes that have happened with that. So, rum was kind of early on. It was definitely a learning process on how to dial in all the changes that happen with the heat. What's the right type of wood? So 2 of the major changes that we've done there is we've changed the yeast that we ferment on. We changed the distillation style, and most importantly, we've now gotten to our 6th or 7th turn on our used bourbon barrels. So it's getting a lot more neutral. So we got less color than we've ever had, and we mix in fewer fresh casks into it. But honestly, the results are incredible. It's lightly tannic. It has this kind of straw yellow color to it. But what's really beautiful is that everything is balancing out on the ester front. I mean, you've got some like light pineapple, some light straw that's in there. It's, probably from the last time you've had a rum, it's probably unrecognizable, I would think.
Tell me about the thought process into changing your yeast strain, because that is such an important part of not just alcohol production, but especially in rum. The yeast gets a lot of attention. Fermentation gets a lot of attention.
Well, we had to narrow down an issue that we were hearing about. A lot of people kind of recognized like an agave note in our rum. And we really kind of had to take a step back and say, that's not where we want to be, and it was a combination of things. But I think the biggest proponent of that was the yeast. So we needed something that was a little more of a neutral profile, something that wouldn't change quite as much as it was aging, because we only aged for about a year on a lot of our rum casks. So I wanted to make sure that we were getting something that was already light, so it would pull the maximum amount that it could from the barrel without changing a bunch of those esters in like a wild, interesting way. And mostly it was just kind of a concerted effort to go a little more neutral. I think that we wanted things to just be a little cleaner, mix well into cocktails, and just be more of what people expect as rum when they crack the bottle.
So the rum has changed. You want it to have a little bit more of a rum profile, less agave. And you guys always have a really close tie to the craft cocktail scene as well. You guys have the Ice Plant bar and restaurant upstairs. I remember taking the tour at St. Augustine, and there was a very definitive cocktail component to it. It seems like you guys are very mindful of not just the spirits themselves, but how they're going to be consumed by people. And that feels like it has really connected to the tourism base that you guys have going through St. Augustine, because St. Augustine runs on tourism. As someone who was born and raised in that area, I can tell you that. How do you think that has changed the spirits overall over the years? Is that connection to not only tourism, but also cocktail culture? Has it refined them? Have you seen it make those spirits fit into a certain box? Is it still allowing you to be creative?
So yes and no. So it certainly is changing the decisions that we make as far as new products, how we want to change things. Cocktailing is extremely important to what we're doing here, because we know that the end user is, as you know, right at the end of the tour. When someone gets a chance to go through our retail shop, land in the bar, immediately have an old fashioned, we're thinking about what's the way that this bourbon needs to fit in that old fashioned perfectly. And that's, and keep in mind too, when we started this company, kind of the general guidance that craft distilleries were getting was that all trends start in bars. And obviously the world has changed a little bit with the pandemic. A lot of that moved towards liquor stores. But it's still very much in our mindset, and it's a core of who we are. Now, you also mentioned tourism limiting us, which it definitely does. There are some things that we want to do that are really funky, really interesting, that every day we sit in the office that we're in right now and we say the consumer won't understand that. They won't support it. And in one way, that's great. It keeps us from kind of chasing these wild ideas. In another way, it makes us feel like, do we want to do something cool every now and again? Absolutely we do. And we do. We just do it in a limited way that we think our consumers will enjoy.
For sure. And then that mindfulness of your consumers' wants and needs and where the trends were going is what led to Citygate. So Citygate is different from St. Augustine in that Citygate makes moonshine. It makes rum and whiskey as well, but all of these are flavored products and much smaller scale of production, much more intimate scale. And that is where Zach comes in, because that's your playground now. So tell me a little bit, Zach, about how you got integrated into St. Augustine's production. Walk me through that, because the last time I saw you, we were, I think, doing, what was it? That awful peanut butter whiskey in the parking lot of Total Wine after like a really long shift.
Oh, man. Yeah, there was quite a few minis next to, I believe it was Applebee's back then. Yep.
Good times. 2020, yeah. Man.
No, so, I was at Total Wine for about 4 years. And I think something that made both you and I click was it's unmistakable when somebody has a passion for something. And talking about alcohol was, anybody who tries to imitate me, mock Zach, okay, well, let me tell you about this new spirit I just got. And so that has always been evolving. And after selling to people for 4 years, I thought it was time to move on and start, diving deeper. And I'm the type who I don't dip my toes in the water. I like to dive. And so I made great relations with Will Hensler. He's our COO of both companies now. I met him when he was the general manager over at Citygate Spirit. And I left my job at Total Wine in November of 2021 and just kind of did some peeping around, see who could use an extra hand and who would help me just lend a free hand. And they'd trade some knowledge. And that's when I reached out to Will and he said, I could talk to my guys and see if maybe we have some open on productions, see if we can get you an interview. And that kind of started off December 8th of 2021. And so I've been here ever since until just recently hopping over to Citygate. But in the meantime, while I was at Stadco, I've had amazing people around me the entire time. I've had Rick, who's been a phenomenal mentor. He knows way more than anybody I know in this industry, and I feel like almost every question I have, he's shaking his head right now, but he definitely does. He's been able to help mentor me and just develop me into a better distiller along the way. And I think a lot of this passion for this whole industry has also led me into these spirit educator roles. So I embarked not long ago, probably just over a year ago, into our morning meetings. And so I started covering things, our basic processes, laws, history, production techniques, and just really diving into that. And then there was an opportunity for me over at Citygate. And I said, I think this would really start to round me out overall as a distiller and just become a little bit better. And it's been a heck of a transition, but it's been a fantastic one. I have at both facilities the most people with enthusiasm. They show up and they have that passion. Like I said, you can sense that when people have the passion. And it's been really easy working with them. It's definitely a little bit of a switch. I was just listening to one of your episodes not long ago with Jackie's ICANN. And one of the things I thought was awesome that you guys were talking about is, when it comes to sensory evaluation, sometimes it can be a little bit daunting or intimidating for folks, or else, you have the whole, don't shout your tasting notes, please. Like, hold on, let's go through this all together. And said, but I really enjoy it when people share their stories. And Rick and I were just talking about it before starting the podcast. There's definitely different crowds for each distillery, and that's great. And so, you have your consumers who love all the original spirit products. I do find that's where you get a lot more into that sensory evaluation, a lot more of the tasting notes. You get into the processes, techniques, and history. But then I heard it was Greg Idams, I want to say, the master distiller of Sugarlands not long ago. And he was kind of touching on this, and he says, when somebody breaks out that bottle of Shine, we're going to kill that. That's when those stories start. And, for example, when I first started at Citygate and I was celebrating my friends, I brought home a Mango Daddle whiskey, and that was it for that bottle. And it's cool that, that I feel like a lot of these bottles start to incorporate into people's experiences, and that's really the whole reason why I'm in this industry, because knowing that what I got to take a part in has become a part of someone else's experience.
I love that. And I love the note that you pointed out with sensory, because people think that you have to be so sophisticated to do sensory. And I remember the first distillery I ever worked for down in Pembroke, Kentucky, MB Roland, they still to this day have a amazing line of moonshine. A lot of it is flavored. And I remember as I was learning to taste, as I was learning what is good, what is bad, what is a quality product and what is off spec, it was tasting different batches of these products. And does this taste the same as the last, or does it taste different? And it's a yes or no question. Is this the same or is this different? And that shines no brighter than with flavored spirits, where with flavored spirits, you really aim for consistency for, I'd say, at least 85% of them. You want a consistent product every time you're using some kind of flavorant, and you want your consumer to come back knowing that this mango is going to taste like this mango every single time. And you have to do quality on that every single time. is it the same or is it not? It doesn't have to be, this tastes like mango brulee with hints of vanilla and marzipan and whatever the fuck else is in it. No, does it taste like mango? Does it not? It's a yes or no question. And I think that's a great point with sensory, is it does not have to be that complicated. It can be yes or no, and you see that shine no better than with flavored products.
100%. I mean, at the end of the day, whether it's flavor or not, but I would have to argue flavored a little bit more. We're here to feed the experiences. I think it was said best in a wine documentary I saw a long time ago that we're always in such a rush in life from task A to task B, from one thing to the next, that we rarely sit down and appreciate the one thing that's in front of us. But the opportunity that we do get with that is when we sit down with others to eat and drink. That's what I love being a part of.
Hell yeah. So you guys do flavored moonshine, you do flavored rum, you do flavored whiskey, and then you do some specialty products, distilled spirit specialty, which I love. DSS. I've judged on DSS. It's my favorite thing. Tell me a little bit about the DSS product that you make that we talked a little bit about before that you apparently reek of right now. I want to hear all about it.
Yeah, right now my hands are near my face and my fingers reek of lemons. The past 3 days, shout out to my team over there at Citygate. They've absolutely been crushing it with wide peelers, automatic peelers, broken peelers. We've borrowed peelers from other people. We've peeled probably near 800 pounds of lemons in the past 3 days. And the reason for that is because we do a seasonal release of limoncello.
So you're like acutely aware of every single paper cut or scratch that you have on your hands at all times.
Oh, yeah. And I mean, we get really into it. We've been playing authentic Italian music over the speaker at the distillery the past 3 days. So people walk in, they notice the smell, they notice the music. They know it's limoncello season, and I would have to argue that's where a lot of our Citygate consumers, it's one of the most exciting times of the season or the year for them.
So you guys are using fresh lemon, you macerate it. Walk me through the rest of the production process on it. And then also, what's the base of it that you guys are working with too?
We're going to use grain neutral spirit, vodka that we distill on site. So that's going to be the base for our spirit. And then we'll peel a couple 100 pounds of Meyer lemons and a couple 100 pounds of regular lemons. And then we will let those macerate and steep for about 72 hours, 3 to 5 days, until the flavor is just right. We cut that off right as it starts to become a little bit of a floral bouquet. Then we finish it off with a little bit of sugar, get it ready for the bottling.
Do you ever find that those peels start to lend towards bitterness towards the end of their maceration with those piths?
They definitely can, and we're very on top of it, constantly checking to see how much we have on there. You're trying to get the thinnest peel as possible to eliminate that.
If you're listening and you're using fresh citrus, don't get the white stuff in your macerate, because it will make your life so much harder than it should be. So as far as lemon, because I have to ask, as someone who's worked with fresh citrus in Florida, and also who is the descendant of someone who grew fresh citrus in Florida for Tropicana, are you guys always using the same variety of lemon? And have you found that those lemons have changed throughout the season?
I'd have to argue so, yeah. Yeah, we've always used the same exact Myers, the same exact regular lemons. And, just as we were talking about earlier, consistency, we find that is what our people love. So we want to keep providing that to them. Now, is that to say that we will never make a change in the future? Not necessarily. We might experiment. We might see what happens. But for now, that has been absolutely taken care of. Our very happy consumers around this time of year.
Sometimes citrus can be so different between harvests, especially with the greening problem happening in Florida, and you're seeing more citrus being imported into the state. And I know some, like when I was working in a bar, if we couldn't get, uniform juice, we would supplement with like citric acid to like boost it if we needed to. So seeing a consistency, but that's always the hard part, is you're working with fresh lemon and fresh citrus, and that can provide such cool flavors. But is it the same every single season? And that sometimes yes, sometimes no.
100%.
So you guys, you mentioned that you're making your own neutral. and your own neutral distilled spirits at Citygate as well? So rectifying all the way up to 180?
We do some sourcing, and then we do some also distilling. So we'll source, redistill, and then we make a marriage of those with our fresh ingredients, with our flavoring, our coloring, and then that's where we kind of get into crafting these ideal expressions.
Yeah. And I think that's such a smart move because, you have your neutral suppliers that they make a beautiful product. And I know some distillers that kill themselves trying to rectify their own neutral spirits and they don't always hit that mark. It's like, man, you were like kind of shooting yourself in the foot trying to say that you distilled every single drop of this alcohol where like you're making it harder than it has to be, Walk me through a little bit of like kind of the equipment that you guys are using at Citygate, because I mentioned that St. Augustine, I know you guys are using 2 Vendome pots over at St. Augustine. So I'm not familiar with the equipment that you're running at Citygate.
Yeah, so Citygate, we have a 30-gallon hybrid still. Small guy, we call him Stubbs, and Stubbs kicks ass. He does everything for us. Hybrid still, 7 plates, sub plates, and I would have to say 99% of everything we run through there is for neutral, so we can turn that into our own. It's a oil jacket, so non-expanding oil. Yeah, that's our main piece of equipment, and then we have a bunch of Latina tanks and mixers. Am I leaving anything out, Rick? Anything major?
No, so I mean, I think the major thing to point out on equipment over there is that, it's mostly a blending operation. So, when we talk about like the definitions of craft, it kind of drives me crazy when people kind of like eschew the idea that, somehow Amari are like super craft, but when you do mostly blending in like a moonshine house, it's not, even though they're almost the kind of same level of production. So that's essentially what we do is we redistill a lot of spirit. We put it in blending tanks and then we flavor it from there. Sometimes it's with macerate materials, raw materials. Sometimes it's extracted materials. As you well know, you can't keep things shelf stable if you're using all macerate materials sometimes, and then you run into crazy filtration problems. I mean, I think, when you're looking at this industry and you're trying to be smart about craft, it's what can you do well? That's the big thing. You have to focus in on one area that you can do really, really well, or you might be able to do better than some other people that are in the market, and focus on that. Don't try to bend over backwards to be like, okay, just because this guy, gets all the accolades because he grows his own grain and he does everything all the way up. There's no sense in competing with that. If you don't have a giant farm out in the middle of nowhere, that's not who you are. And we are in downtown St. Augustine making fun spirits with amazing flavors and trying to put them in front of people that are here to have a great weekend.
And that's you could be in St. Augustine. You could make you could make an aquavit. You could make an aquavit that rivals all Scandinavian aquavit. It could be beautiful. You could be growing your botanicals locally. You could be distilling that aquavit, grain to glass. It could be just the definition of aquavit, and no one's going to care because it's St. Augustine. It is a tourist mecca, and that's not what your tourist wants. It's not what your Midwesterner wants. And that's not to say that there isn't a market for aquavit in the US. This is not a dig at aquavit or any other niche spirit, but it is really knowing your consumer and your area and knowing what pays your bills. I love the t-shirts that say like vodka pays the bills, because it is very, very much true. You can make the coolest, most niche product in the entire world. You can make all those weird DSS and meat spirits that I talk about on this podcast, but does it fucking matter if you can't sell them? And that's what people who are going through a tourism experience that want a cocktail experience, that's what they want. And it's a very, very important part of the conversation that I agree with you, Rick, does not get talked about enough in terms of craft distilling. That the blenders, the people who make flavored spirits, they are just as important as those who are making the really niche, weird aquavits that are coming out of anywhere else in the U.S.,
I agree.
Aquavit's great. This is not a dig on aquavit.
I joke with the staff here all the time. I say, number one, we make the best spirits we can possibly make. Number two, we got to cash your paychecks. It's in that order, because you well know how tough this business is and what all of us are competing with. And when it comes down to it, exactly to your point, make what your people want. You know, it's like we all have these lofty ideals. We all want to do the cool new thing. But what actually works the best is, what can you do well? What do your people want? That's what we're focused on.
And people who like to romanticize like Bardstown and Kentucky distilleries that we make all this lofty bourbon, most people don't realize that these really big corporations that own more than just bourbon distilleries, like Bardstown bottles, the city of Bardstown and all the distilleries that inhabit Bardstown, we bottle way more than just bourbon here. There is a lot of flavored spirits that gets bottled in this town that most people don't realize, and they pay the bills. They keep people employed, and people drink them and appreciate them, and they need to be made well. They need to be made in a thoughtful manner that is delicious, that is shelf stable, that is relevant to what people are drinking. Otherwise, like, what's the point, you know?
100%. And I think you said it really well right before we started the podcast. You know, as distillers, you wear so many hats. And especially, you know, over at Citygate, where I think my apartment might be the same size as production, you know, it's roughly the same. But that really creates a lot of room for innovation. And I think it also gets a lot of our consumers invested. You know, I think one of the most common questions I've heard so far at Citygate when guests walk in is, what are you guys making today? What does that smell? What's going on? And we get them a little bit involved in the process and tell them a little bit about what we do.
And I think it's also that gateway spirit, you know, someone tastes something that's flavored and it's a flavor that they know and they can recognize and that they're attracted to. That is what's going to open them up to, oh, I didn't think I liked moonshine. I didn't think I liked whiskey, but you made me like it because I identified this thing in it. And now I'm more open to taste more things. And I could be persuaded to try gin, or maybe even that really weird aquavit that you have on your shelf that's gathering dust, you know?
100%. And
again, not a dig on aquavit. I'm picking on that. I just know that no one in Northeast Florida knows what aquavit is for the most part. So that's the only reason I'm picking that spirit. I could pick any other one.
Hey, I just had Lenny aquavit last week.
You're special, Zach. We're not talking about you.
But no, that was something that I talked a lot with our team over at Citygate when my first couple of weeks there is, you know, I was kind of trying to feel out the team and some of the things that they're running into. And, you know, I always try to make sure that production is always an open book. And so we go back and forth on processes, history, you know, like I said, in the spirits educator role. And one of the things that I was hearing a lot to feed what you're talking about, getting people in on these different flavors is, you know, what are some of the most common questions that our guests are asking you, or statements? And some of them were as simple as, well, I only drink my spirits neat. And our Citygate response to that is, that's okay. We're not going to put any ice in your samples today. But the other side to that is, you know, a lot of them are, I only drink bourbon, I only drink Irish, I only drink Scotch. So we did this really cool thing where the production team, myself, we got together, put our brains together, and we made these cocktails with our spirits that fed a lot of these popular styles of whiskey. So the bourbon, the Irish, the Scotch. And because I told our team, you know, if somebody comes in and they say, I only drink bourbon, okay, that's great. You know, now we know something about you. We can begin to connect. And we don't want to take you away from what you enjoy, but how can we cater to that? How can we build into your experience? So we even did something neat just for the team to kind of understand. So we took our Florida straight bourbon from St. Augustine Distillery, our old fashioned mix, and then we did a little bit of orange and cream moonshine and smoked maple. And that was a beautiful, all the way through from start to finish. You know, you start with that bourbon up front. So we're catering to our bourbon guys. And maybe at first they think that they don't like flavored spirits, but then that orange and cream kind of comes in. It complements the orange bitters, maybe the orange gardens. And then you get a little bit of that smoked maple on the finish. And I know that smoked cocktail, smoked eau de fashioned seem to be a little bit of a trend right now.
I love that you have created this kind of curated tasting experience, not necessarily for a tour group or whatever that comes through, but for the actual person. You're a bourbon drinker, this is what you should try. You're a rum drinker, this is what you should try. I think that opens so many doors and is brilliant, because oftentimes I will go into a distillery and here are 4 whiskeys. I don't care what you like. This is what we have. deal with it. And that's fine because I like whiskey. But if I'm with someone who doesn't, it's kind of a bummer time for them. That's a really, really smart, curated way of doing it. And I really admire that.
Thank you. And it was something that we were even able to. I took that same bottle that we made that cocktail in, and I even brought it over to St. Augustine Distillery because, just on the other side of that, like you were just saying, some people don't like whiskey, they don't like gin or rum. And so we're like, hey, we have this sister company over here who does all these really cool flavor things. This is a way that you can incorporate and maybe start a little bit on your bourbon journey or your rum journey or whatever it may be.
Well, and I think that also ties back into your experience at Total Wine. And you and I had to be mind readers back then. And when people were like, yeah, I'm looking for this spirit for this event, this dish I'm making, this date, this whatever, and we had to predict what they would want, and we would have to give them options. And you're taking that knowledge that you cultivated there and you're applying it to a different setting. But the difference is you have your hands in making what goes into this new kind of scenario, and that's really cool to see that evolution.
Absolutely. And it just feels really good knowing that we can kind of bring in everybody for the enjoyment, for the experience, like I was talking about earlier. It doesn't matter what you like. We're going to figure out a way to make sure that you're a part of it.
Yeah. So to kind of wrap this conversation up, I know I met you before you were a distiller, and now you're not only a distiller, you're a whole head distiller of a distilling company in Florida. And we talked a little bit about, the influence Rick has had on you in terms of mentorship, but what would you recommend to people that are kind of looking to do a similar career trajectory that you have gone through, that I've gone through? I know kind of what I tell people, and it's just to kind of put yourself out there and learn as much as you can. But what would you say from your experience? What resources did you consume that were useful for you? What were not? What was the biggest learning curve? What was a little bit more intuitive?
Yeah. Kind of like what you said is try it. I was just having this conversation with somebody the other day, and it says, my biggest piece of advice is try it. If you think this is something that you want to do, give it a hand. Go around town, make connections. My very first piece of experience, we say, in the distilling industry was me just going around to local distilleries and breweries and saying, hey, I'm willing to lend a free hand if you'll just trade some industry knowledge. This is who I am. This is what I do. This is what I think I want to do. And people slowly started opening up that door for me. And, you're not going to get anywhere if you don't try.
And I would say the sales side also. You had experience with Total Wine. For me, I always recommend if you can't get into a distillery, at least get into the sales side, because that's such a critical part of the equation. Understanding how sales works, understanding how these larger companies market, how you should market your spirits. Mm-hmm. And I know St. Augustine, especially St. Augustine Distillery products, are very widely distributed now. And it's important to know how to do that song and dance. Would you agree with that, Rick?
Yeah, I think that's maybe the most important part of it. Luckily, St. Augustine Distillery spirits, they're really only in the state of Florida right now. We're also in Georgia a little bit, but we've kind of had the great fortune of being pretty popular in our home base. But yeah, sales is huge, and it's very confusing. So, most of what I tell people is get in on the distillation side like us, because you don't have to be so smart.
Yeah. And then before we sign off, what do you want people to know about Florida distilled products? Because I know what I tell people about making spirits in Florida, but what would you guys say to people about Florida distilled anything? Rum, gin, whiskey, vodka. What sets it apart? What's special about it?
Well, first and foremost, come to it open-minded. I think a lot of people try Florida bourbon for the first time and they go, this isn't Kentucky. And the first thing I say is, yeah, it's not supposed to be. It's supposed to be Florida bourbon. Every choice that we make in our production practices is about honoring Florida and the environment that we're in. Every single choice, because we know we can't get away from it and we don't even want to try. So we don't condition our aging warehouses. We don't do any of that. We lean right into the heat, the humidity, the airflow. the saltiness that we get, off of the ocean, all of that stuff is a part of our process. So when you try Florida spirits, expect it to taste like Florida in a way that you don't expect. Also get really excited about all the sugarcane that we have here. I mean, 3 of our 4 major internal spirit types at St. Augustine Distillery are cane based. And we try to put cane and orange and Florida grain and everything we possibly can, because those are just really highlights of the state that we're from.
And we didn't even get into cane, and I feel remiss to not add that you guys work with cane farmers as well, correct? To make your rum. You go out and work alongside them for harvests and things of that nature. I remember that being a very big part of your tour experience when I went through years ago.
So we did early on. And I think, if Phil and Mike were here, the first thing they would tell you is that we kind of got in way over our head with like cane harvesting. That is something that is very, very hard work for a very low yield. So we kind of wised up on that a little bit, and we moved towards molasses.
Molasses is definitely a lot more of a steady stream than cane can be, and cane can be very volatile to work with.
Exactly.
Do you see differences between molasses batches in terms of your yield and your oh man, what's the word I'm looking for? The stuff that fouls your equipment. Ash. Your ash content in your molasses?
Not really. It's pretty consistent for us. And one of my favorite things about the way that we handle molasses is we pretty much only deal with it when it's warm outside, which, it's Florida, it's warm all the time. But one of the things that Will and I did a podcast recently, and he brought this up, and it's like one of my favorite facts about the distillery. Yes, rum ferments better because it's nice and hot in the summer, but the really cool thing about it is that the molasses thins out a little bit, and it doesn't stick to the toad as much, and it's a lot easier to deal with. So yeah, we mostly made that choice out of ease of use, which, any aspiring distillers listening out there, do everything you can to make your process easy on you, because I promise you this is hard work.
Not only will it make your process easier, but 9 times out of 10, it'll make your products taste better too.
And more consistent.
It's a little easier.
Yeah.
I remember when I first worked with molasses, I remember being like, oh my God, I don't have to cook this. Like, I don't have to go through like an 8-hour cooking thing.
Yep.
I just have to like dilute it with water and throw yeast in it, and that it eliminates a whole day of production for me. I get why this is an attractive thing now.
Absolutely.
Awesome.
Absolutely.
Yeah, amazing.
Yeah.
Well, Zach, Rick, thank you guys so much for coming on and shooting the shit with me. It's so fun to talk to people, not only that like I knew from a past life, but are still working in essentially my hometown. I mean, Jacksonville and St. Augustine are like an hour apart, but technically I own a house in the St. Augustine city limits. So I can technically say that I'm still a St. Augustine resident, which is really fun.
Thank you so much for having us on here. And I think I speak for both of us when I say this. We're so freaking proud of what you're doing up there and how far you've gone. And, it's amazing that the 3 of us can sit in this room, 10 years after meeting each other and just have this conversation. So thank you.
I'm so proud of both of you. We're all proud of each other, especially Zach, man. God, we were in the trenches together in 2020 in Total Wine. Oh my God.
Yeah.
In case you were wondering, working in a Total Wine in 2020 was very similar to trench warfare.
Yeah, we're not wearing gloves or masks in this conversation. It's beautiful. I don't know if I said it in the podcast. I know I definitely said it before the podcast, but I am so proud of you and so happy to have to be back full circle with somebody who I watched in my hometown go from distillery to distillery to distillery and just do nothing but growth and innovation. And, I feel like you're really making a name for yourself. And it's so cool to be back here, the 3 of us, and on this podcast with you. And I can't thank you enough for this opportunity.
Thank you, guys. I love y'all so much. It's so great to catch up. You guys are going to be the first on my list the next time I'm down in Florida, which hopefully will be soon. But before we wrap up, since that's a really great, very sweet note to close on, I would say, important to note that for more than 30 years, G&D Chillers has had the proven solution for distilleries, and you should visit them today at gdchillers.com. And if you've enjoyed this podcast, you should go to spiritsanddistilling.com and sign up for our free newsletter, which features news stories every week from some of the best writers and distillers and in the distilling world. Awesome content on there as always. Rick and Zach, if people want to learn more or taste for themselves some of the results of the projects you're working on or have been working on or things that you have coming up, how can they dig a bit deeper?
Well, first thing, come and see me. Show up at the distillery. We'll show you everything we have going on. But
Tours
if you can't,
every hour on the hour still, right?
oh my God, 7 days a week.
And they're free.
They're free.
They're so much fun.
Yeah. And we have VIP tours. If you want to deep dive into bourbon, you can come and experience that. We're starting to do like a distiller for a day thing, which is really cool if you really want to deep dive. But outside of that, if you're in the state of Florida, you should be able to find us at most of your local liquor stores. If you're outside the state of Florida, we do work with the distributor out of DC that has the right to ship, but only to limited states. So look them up. They're called Big Thirst. Make sure that your state is on the list.
Big Thirst is great. Yeah. Shout out to those guys. They're good friends.
Yeah.
Zach, how can people learn about Citygate?
Absolutely. CitygateSpirits.com. You'll find us on there. I think our Instagram is one of the funniest distillery Instagrams I've ever seen. We have a lot of great content. We just had somebody out there today filming us peel these 800 pounds of lemons. Somebody on our team may or may not know how to juggle. You might see that.
Is it you?
Yeah.
Is it you?
I wish. There might be a photo of me, but I gotta just spoil it. It's not real. I was pretending. Yeah, definitely catch us online at, like I said, CitygateSpirits.com, on our Instagram. I think we're on Twitter. And most importantly, obviously, come visit us. Like, we want to share this experience with you.
Yeah. If you guys are in Florida, St. Augustine is just a really cool town to visit. There's so many experiences there. The beach is great. Castillo de San Marcos is great. The food is great. But there's a really cool distillery scene there now, and you should definitely go check it out. Thank you guys so much for being on the podcast today. Those who are listening, thank you for being on and listening to us catch up. We will be back in 2 weeks with another in-depth distilling conversation for you. Thank you for joining us. Cheers.
This podcast has been brought to you by Spirits and Distilling for those who love to make and drink great spirits. Join our free newsletter today at spiritsanddistilling.com for pragmatic, technical, and creative distilling stories in your inbox every week. Sign up now at spiritsanddistilling.com or click on the link in the show notes.